we've got Pooty and PDX Scanner on the call today, so I'm going to take this opportunity to watch some more of this because I want to watch it. It's been pretty good, and I'm not going to be all tied up with the calls, which I've been for the last 2 days. So let's see what's going on here.
What we were just talking about, safety and response, security, and so Trimet has handed over transit policing to Multnomah County and created a non-armed safety response team. I'm fascinated by that because I'm at PSU. We're also patrolling unarmed, and it's a new role for our safety and security.
We already heard this.
Pilot.
How?
Moving ahead.
The employee issues, retention, hiring issues that we've discussed thus far. I'm so pleased to know that all of our staff, everyone here, as well as those who are not present in this room, are thinking about this, and as we're heading in.
Yeah, we already heard this.
I'm scared and excited, frankly, at us stepping forward into this challenge. I don't see us having much of a choice, but luckily, the bones of our system, the bones of our infrastructure, and the region that we're serving are still there. And we still have many reasons to get outside and move around. So we're trying to figure out how to match that. I really appreciate the question, but I think it's at the nexus of what we're trying to do together.
Thank you.
I want to acknowledge that the federal government has put a great deal of resources into transit all over the country. It's been a great commitment from the federal
It's not going to
building.
Move forward.
They want to go. And I can assure you that the board is aligned with staff, with the general manager, in looking at all possible ways to look at the way we serve our particularly our bus service.
Yes, it's a complete and total failure, and you can say what you want, but we know the truth. And the Tax Supervising Commission, there's just another level of bureaucracy that's not going to challenge them.
Not to discontinue ones that are serving the public well, but potentially to reallocate some of the service.
We already know they're going to cut your service into pieces. They got Jarrett Walker out there. Didn't ask you, they're just going to do it because that's how they do things.
To areas where people...
Your employer's feeling about the tax, particularly since
All right. Here's the next question, so get past that last one.
Had your chance to weigh in. All right, different topic. I have always thought that particularly non-users of the transit system think that fare box is what runs your system, but those of us in this room know that the employer payroll tax is the big driver of your operational revenues. So, and we also know that you have had since 2016 an automatic increase in the tax rate that's scheduled to last till 2025 I think, 26. So the question is, I noticed that I think it was Mr. Vanetta who was saying about the employers that are back in town, but it was the feds, the city, Trimet, the county, the governmental employers. So the question is, how are your employers feeling about the tax, particularly since the idea of the tax or the selling point was it's how your employees get to work. They're working from home. It's how your customers...
That's right. Another great point by this woman. This woman needs to be on the Trimet board. This woman, she's impressive with her knowledge of this stuff.
Get to your business. Well, they're getting their stuff delivered or ordering online. Are you getting any pressure from the employer community about the tax rate?
Of course you are.
Let me start first, JC, and then we'll kind of navigate the UND for a moment. We sit on several committees in the city of Portland. The Business Alliance is one of the boards that we participate with. And we've heard from some of our stakeholders about putting more service out on the street. You're getting more funding, you should put more service out. And we've talked to them about the problems that we are experiencing with the recruitment and the retention portion of it. One of our priorities as we move forward into FY23 is our community partnership relationships. And that's an area that we're focusing here at Trimet, is to build and strengthen those relationships and really to go and tell our story. I think that that's an area that we've got to really focus on, is really telling what Trimet is about, what our purpose and how we can help the region. Because me as a general manager, I get up every single day with the focus in mind. It's about people. It's about getting people to opportunities, to be able to take them to medical.
Oh my God, we're fucking bullshit! Oh my God, ridiculous!
Medical and health and housing and also educations and getting people to jobs. So we've got to continue to tell that story there.
Answer the
We've had
question.
very few people that come forward to talk with us about the employer tax, but we're working with them to really tell that story here.
That was the worst answer I've ever seen. We're working with them to tell the story of how we can't take anybody to work because we have no bus operators and our system is a complete failure. It's pretty early in the morning for this, but I've been drinking today.
Yeah. And also, just continue on the financial side, aside from what General Manager Dessou has indicated, the employers have not been coming forward in mass numbers to question or to ask us to roll back the payroll tax or to even stop it. As you may recall, we actually have to report every year on how we're using that fund and whether we still need it or not. And they're very understanding about the fact that it does cost a great deal of money to run this system. They're very pro-transit, both for the environment and also because it's a great help to their employees. And while it's great now we're working remotely, many are experiencing hybrid situations where some are working remotely, some are not, some are coming in more times than others. But we are working with them. We worked on our institutional program this last year and the year before that during the pandemic to reduce the cost of that for the employers to reflect the changes in ridership and the reduction in ridership by their employees. We've dramatically modified the programs, but unfortunately our cost of service remains high. So every bit of the money is needed to keep us going. So now I'll turn it over to JC if he has any other
Bullshit answer. Good bullshit. Two bullshit answers. CJC.
comments.
Yeah, I'd just like to tack on to what Dee and Sam have already said. We have stayed in close contact with all of our employers throughout the pandemic, as Dee had said, really working with them to reduce potentially some of their cost of transit, because some of them were still needing it to move essential workers to and from home and to the jobs. So, and through a number of surveys too throughout the pandemic, just to get a pulse of what they were thinking and feeling. And so we've stayed close. I would also note, and I've just acknowledged Tom Mills, who's out in the audience. He's managing our comprehensive service analysis. And with it, as you know, some companies have relocated to the suburbs, or they're kind of rethinking about how they're bringing people back. Really, how can we take our analysis and their movements with the employers and the employees and the movements, how do we then put that into our plan moving forward? And so Tom and his team are really doing a lot of outreach with the counties, with employers, to understand those origin and destination so that we can program that into our next service plan. So we've not heard that chatter, but we have also been staying in close contact with them.
Great, thank you.
You're staying in close contact with the business community. Sure you are. Sure. You believe you. You never lie. You guys always tell the truth.
I have the next question, shifting gears a little bit. Obviously, the pandemic has brought us unprecedented levels of change and disruption, but it's also brought unprecedented levels of funds from our state and federal partners and governments. And we talked about this last year and how that's provided relief, but and we know many districts are receiving those funds again this year, or money is being carried over. barring unforeseen circumstances, fingers crossed, that we are actually coming out of this, that spigot is closing. So we're interested with that additional money.
Yeah, what did they do with it? Because they were supposed to preserve service, and we know they didn't do that. So what did you do with it? Let's see if she'll ask.
Funds. What programs or services began with that pandemic money? Are you continuing or planning to continue into the future? And how will those be funded, given the fact that those dollars are changing or drying up?
Oh, okay. I've been asking this question for months.
Good point. Good questions. So this year, the agency's primarily, ever since the pandemic funding began, we've been primarily spending it on what the funding requires, which is directly on increased cleanliness of the system, safety, protection of riders and employees.
No, the money was for maintaining service. Okay, I can tell you that for sure. Okay. And of course, the cleaners, but they got rid of the cleaners, so let's hear out what she says.
But the funds continue to support our operations. We haven't laid anyone off.
You haven't laid anyone off. You've had 300 drivers quit or retire. Obviously, you don't need to lay anyone off.
Significantly cut service. We have had to cut service some. But
it's a fucking disaster.
This money is what's keeping this agency going, in operationally. And as
You're a liar. I'm a fucking liar.
Our ridership returns, and we didn't mention it earlier, but it has been about 25% return since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're hopeful that it's currently plateauing, but we expect it to continue to rise soon as soon as the confidence in the system returns, and we have measures in place for that. But since we've been able to run it, keep everything running and not cut things, the question comes, okay, what happens when the money stops? Well, we have learned how to tighten our belts. We have learned how to run the system on less money. And we do expect, with the strength of our payroll taxes, we will be able to return.
Let's get this straight. The only thing they lost was the rider revenue, which was around $200 million a year. And they got more than that by the federal government. All right? So they didn't really lose anything. They actually came out ahead. They got more money than they would have otherwise. So this they're lying as usual.
We'll be able to continue operations as far as we can, up towards the end of this decade, for sure. It's given us a new way to look at things, too, the pandemic.
You'll be able to continue as long as you have tax revenue, forever. You'll never go out of business. Most of your money is wasted.
Itself, remote working, cleanliness of the vehicles, platforms, and evaluation of the service itself, as you've heard. We're working on all of this to make it as cost effective as possible so that we can continue operations as usual, as normal.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Margaret.
Another bogus answer.
Chair, if I could ask you a little bit more. The budget message and a number of places in the document talk about...
I want this woman on the board. This is the woman I want. This woman is smart. I think she was at the last meeting.
The fact that you're carrying more forward in unrestricted fund balance because you've been able to use the federal monies to kind of allow you to do that. But you always refer to using it to fund shortfalls in near-term future years. You just said to the end of the decade. Wow. I just wanted to understand.
Yeah, she's so sharp.
I did not take near-term shortfalls to be going to the end of the decade.
Well, they taper out as we move out. We have unexpected expenses occurring now, such as the ones you've heard of earlier about the larger cost towards retaining and recruiting. And so we are expecting it to...
That's something. Why?
To move forward. Near term, we're looking at the fiscal year 23 budget. And so near term at 23 is you're now into 26, 27. That's how
What is
we're
she talking about?
So we do expect that that will be really, we'll be making we'll be taking a closer look at how we are operating the agency towards the end of this decade. So maybe end of the decade is the wrong term. Maybe in the late near future.
Well, it sounds as if you're.
There's no way they're going to ever go out of business because they have dedicated funding. Of course, the riders will always get fucked. The employees, they'll give them the least amount possible.
Personnel costs, because not just of the incentives and the retention benefits, but the base pay is also rising to meet the market conditions that...
No, it's not. They got a 3% raise.
You're going to be carrying a heavier load, and that this, if ridership doesn't respond, and I think you said instead of 25, I think you said now it would be 28, 29 before ridership recovers.
That's what our very conservative financial forecast model
It sounds like that unrestricted balance is going to have a lot of calls on it.
Completely right. Absolutely correct.
All right, thank you.
Well,
so
she asked a good question. She didn't really get an answer.
Our next question is also about federal funding, but is about federal funding looking forward instead of looking back. So we know that Trimet has received a significant share of transportation money from the federal infrastructure bill that President Biden signed in November 21. We're wondering how much money Trimet will be receiving, what you expect to do with those funds, and then how many years any new projects will take to complete, and how you'll be thinking about measuring success.
Sure, I will take that one as well. Thank you for the question. So there's two parts to that federal infrastructure bill. One part addresses the continuation of the FAST Act, and that part assures us that we'll be receiving approximately $25 million more per year than we previously were. We were previously receiving somewhere around $41 million. So that increased funding will go towards the primary purpose, which is preventive maintenance on our buses and trains, and that will help us to supplant.
You better do something about that because your buses are junk and your trains are junk.
And other funding, for example, the payroll tax that helps us continue to operate until we get that federal money, and then those funds can be redistributed through our capital projects for more.
Of course. Capital projects, of course.
Infrastructure improvements. Then the other part of the Infrastructure Act speaks to increases in the competitive grant programs that are run through FTA. And we expect to apply for as many grants as we can identify, but at this moment, we're unable to give you an exact number of how much that money could be. But on the short list of how we'll spend that money is the ongoing effort towards moving our bus fleet to non-emissions or zero emissions, and the fleet replacement of 700 plus buses, plus infrastructure to support it's a long-term, very expensive proposition. But we also expect to seek funding for our Columbia bus base, as well as long-term state of good repair infrastructure projects, including the replacement of at least 4 tranches of light rail vehicles over time.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Who cares? Nothing there.
So, shift gears over to capital projects and maintenance, and you mentioned in your opening comments, Mr. Dessou, about the Red Line to Better Red project. Could you expand more on what that project entails, and in particular, aside from the extension on the west side, how the project will improve and affect the system as a whole?
Good. Let's hear it.
I appreciate the question. This is
appreciate the question. We're all so formal. We're all very nice to each other.
Key piece of Trimet, so I'm going to turn it over to our executive director.
There you go, Rippy. He turns it over. Fucking Sam Dessou. He doesn't know shit about shit. Turn it over to somebody that knows something.
Director Steve Witter.
Thank you, General Manager.
Steve Witter, who's quit, and they haven't mentioned the fact that the city has just sued Trimet for $10 million. They're not going to bring that up.
Mr. Dessou, good morning, Matt. Thank you for your question.
Thank you for the question.
The Red Line was first conceived in the mid-'80s, so even before Trimet opened its first line, there were folks talking about extending light rail into the airport. In 1997, Bechtel a developer came to Trimet and said, we'd like to build you a light rail line in exchange for property rights to develop in the Port of Portland area. And so that was the first true public-private partnership that Trimet has entered into. Since then, the line's been very popular, but as a public-private partnership and as Bechtel is in the business of making money, value engineering ran rampant throughout the project. And so sections of double track that were originally planned were brought to single track. The airport station that you've known and loved was actually a temporary station intended to be redone along with the airport as it goes through its expansion, which you're actually seeing today. So it was built on the cheap. And so now...
Yeah, okay, let's take that it was. Let's believe what you just said. So what? It works just fine. I used to use the red line all the time, coming back from the airport, not going to the airport. What was the deal?
Here we are, and we're restoring some of those features that were taken out of the original proposal.
I see. So they're pork barreling it up, folks. You just admitted it.
Our chief senior systems engineer, John Griffiths, who has been with Trimet forever and is our rail planner, has a list of bottlenecks. And the Gateway Airport single track section is number 2 on that list, with the steel bridge being number 1. And you're familiar that we made significant improvements at the steel bridge in 2020.
Yeah, and it hasn't done shit. It's still getting delays.
So the benefits, besides just extending 10 stations of service out to Hillsborough, the single track sections affect the whole network. And the minute you have a train coming late out of PDX, it will ripple through the entire network for the entire day. And what happens is as that ripple effect goes through the network, it exacerbates itself and it grows and it grows and it grows. And by 5 o'clock, you've got trains stacked up. Your ability to sort of, meter out passengers per train is eroded. And so with this reliability improvement on the east side, the single track sections, and fixing the interlocker at Gateway, we're able to improve overall system reliability. We're able to do it through a grant with the federal government by also extending that service out 10 stations to Hillsborough.
Which already has track. It's like there's already track there. It's like if you add buses to a bus route, you got to change the road. The answer is no. You don't change the road. The road's already there.
Which increased our ridership. And so suddenly we, and Alan Leto, the architect of this whole scheme, is here in the audience. And Alan and I...
It's Leto's idea. That's interesting. I always liked Leto. He's a decent guy.
Went up to Seattle with this harebrained idea that we could pull this off, and here we are, we're building this project.
Yeah, it's all money. You just care about the money. Tell the truth. We just care, hey, we can get the money, let's get the money. We can get it, then we're going to do it.
What are the other benefits? I mentioned the system reliability throughout the system. We're going to get through this grant-funded project some additional light rail vehicles to replace our Type 1 aging vehicles. We have a brand new operator brake facility out in the Hillsborough area, so new facilities for our operators, and some non-revenue pieces of track in the Gateway area, which will allow our maintenance and operations folks to move trains around in case of emergencies, disruptions, and all the work they have to do in the middle of the night. So, Matt, that's my response. I'd be happy to take any follow-ups.
Okay, follow it up. Come on, you people are smarter than me.
And apologies if I'm not as familiar with the specifics of the Gateway piece. It seems like in your description, Executive Director Witter, really great to see bottlenecks being removed systemically, and working through a list of priorities that will make the system work better overall. Specifically at Gateway, I wonder if you could shed a little light on. Isn't part of that change also going to move, the double track part makes complete sense, but isn't part of it also to move the bus service like a little bit farther away? And I wondered if you could just talk about kind of the future thinking, and it's a similar dynamic at Hollywood as well, right? That under the new model, the light rail and bus will be like a little bit farther apart.
Yeah, they ruined Hollywood Transit Center for bus riders.
And I just wondered, what Trimet's thinking is about, like a slightly longer commute between rail and bus passengers, and how you're thinking about that.
There you go.
Sure. James, it's always a balance between providing the sort of seamless movement of passengers between trains and transfers.
Hilarious, the seamless movement. Spoken like a true technocrat, where you know how to sling the shit as good as anybody I've seen.
And also making sure the system moves smoothly itself. And so you're exactly right. We have separated part of the station platforms at Gateway. And so I didn't bring my drawings and my crutches that I use. But essentially, the majority of our passengers traveling from the airport are headed to destinations to the west, downtown and west side. And I say the majority, that's not everyone. That's not everyone. But so what happens is that train that comes from the airport will come to Gateway to that separated station. Here's the Gateway today, and here's that separated station. And it's going to go right downtown Portland.
Yeah.
So the majority of those users making that move are not going to be forced to transfer. There will be users that are headed east into Gresham, and they will need to walk.
Big deal.
And you're probably leaping to, well, what about some...
What, you're going to walk, like, what, 50 feet? Jesus, you got to be kidding me.
With a mobility challenge or other things. We have kind of a similar situation at the Rose Quarter when folks want to make a seamless transfer to the Yellow Line. And so what folks do is...
You ever see the transfers at the Yellow Line? They just go right across the street, no crosswalks. They go diagonally.
They actually stay on for another station trip. So in order to get those blue lines and green lines, folks transfer at 82nd rather than at Gateway. So it's a little bit of an inconvenience. Other folks will take that, block-long trip and walk to those trains and buses at the Gateway Transit Center. So it is an inconvenience that we...
It's barely an inconvenience. Barely an inconvenience.
We're forced to sort of mitigate against the larger system improvement.
Ridiculous.
Question. I'm gonna pass.
Anybody else?
Okay. I'm follow up.
Yeah. So you also mentioned introductory remarks about the Division Route FX project.
All right, cut it here. That's enough for today. Nah, it's just a bunch of baloney. We're not getting much information here. They're just giving your technocratic, bureaucratic answers. I don't know what to say about it. There's nothing to say about it, really. Over and out.